Close your eyes, dear listener. Let the noise of the day melt away. Allow each breath to slow, like a soft breeze drifting through ancient ruins. Tonight, we set sail to the Gardner Museum Art Heist, Boston, 1990.
Boston slept beneath a thin veil of rain. The storm had come early in the evening, sweeping through the city with a rush of damp wind and leaving the streets slick, the kind of sheen that turned the asphalt into a black mirror. It was March 18, 1990. St. Patrick's Day fading into the pale hours of the morning, and even the revelers had quieted now, their laughter drifting away into the cold Atlantic air. The city, for a moment, felt paused. Trains rumbled beneath the streets in muted tones. The steady hum of traffic along Storrow Drive softened to a whisper. In the Fenway district, where the Back Bay fens curved like a silver ribbon, a single building stood apart, elegant, mysterious, timeless. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. By day, it was a sanctuary of beauty. Venetian-style courtyards, marble statues, galleries hung with the finest art the world had ever known. Vermeer's soft light, Rembrandt's haunted shadows, a garden blooming even in the chill of Boston's winter. But by night, the museum belonged to silence. Its walls breathed secrets, and its galleries, lined with stolen centuries, seemed to watch and wait. Tonight, the silence was deeper. In the courtyard, the moonlight caught the glimmer of stone, the pale marble statue of Hermes, the messenger, standing frozen beneath the glass roof. His carved eyes seemed to follow the quiet shift of shadows across the patterned tiles. Rainwater collected in the fountain, its surface trembling with the faint vibrations of something moving, something unseen just beyond the veil of ordinary hours. Far above, beyond the quiet hum of the city, the gods watched. Rick Abath tugged at the brim of his cap as he leaned against the security desk. It was close to 1 a.m., and boredom had set in like damp in the bones. The monitors in front of him flickered with dull black and white images. The side entrance, the narrow galleries, the courtyard bathed in artificial glow. Nothing ever happened here, not on his shifts at least. He ran a hand through his hair, curling slightly under the cap, and reached for the guitar propped against the wall. He strummed a soft chord, careful not to wake the other guard, Randy, who was somewhere down in the basement, half asleep with a radio murmuring old rock ballads. Outside, the city's hum deepened, as though inhaling. But the museum knew. Beneath the marble tiles and painted ceilings, where air ducts hummed and the faint drip of condensation marked time, something ancient stirred. Not the hum of alarms or the whir of cameras, something older. In the garden court, the statue of Hermes seemed almost alive in the shifting light. If anyone had been there to see it, they might have sworn his marble fingers twitched, his mouth curling into the ghost of a smile. The god of travelers, of tricksters, of thieves. The kind who walked unseen. In the streets outside, a white hatchback rolled to a quiet stop near the side entrance. Its tires whispered against the wet pavement. 2 men sat inside, the glow of the dashboard casting pale green across their faces. They wore uniforms, navy blue, badges gleaming dully in the light. "Looks clear," one said, his voice calm, almost casual. The other only nodded. His eyes were sharp, focused, like a predator that had rehearsed the hunt 100 times. He reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a strip of duct tape, and set it carefully on the dashboard. Above them, the moon dipped behind a slow-moving cloud,
and the rain began again, soft, deliberate. Inside the museum, Rick strummed another lazy chord. The sound echoed faintly through the empty halls, a ripple of life against the quiet. He thought of his band, of songs half-written, of dreams too big for this silent night. He never noticed the way the shadows near the courtyard thickened, or the whisper, just the barest thread of a voice, curling through the stillness like smoke. "Run, little dreamer." At 1:24 a.m., the side buzzer rang, sharp, metallic. Rick glanced at the monitor, blinking away the haze of boredom. 2 uniformed officers stood in the drizzle outside, their breath fogging the night air. Red and blue lights pulsed faintly against the walls. "This is Boston PD," one said into the intercom, voice steady. "We got a report of a disturbance. Open up." Rick hesitated. A trickle of unease slid down his spine, though he couldn't have said why. Nothing ever happened here. And yet, the buzzer rang again. Above, in the quiet corridors where marble faces gazed down from gilded frames, the air shifted. The statues, the muses, the saints, the silent gods carved in stone, seemed to lean closer, as if listening. In the garden court, Hermes smiled.
The garden court never truly slept, even in the deep hours of night, when Boston itself seemed to sigh and collapse into silence. The courtyard breathed softly, like a cathedral filled with unseen prayers. The moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling in fractured shards, pooling across the black and white tiles in broken constellations. At the center, the fountain murmured to itself, water falling in a steady rhythm, as though keeping time no clock could measure. Around it, marble statues held their eternal vigil, gods, muses, and saints plucked from centuries past, each with their hollow stone eyes turned inward. And among them, one stirred. Hermes, the messenger, the boundary crosser, the patron of all who walked between worlds. His marble feet did not move, but the shadow beneath him quivered, as if alive. His carved lips curved in the faintest smirk, as if some private joke had been told, one mortals could never understand. "Tonight," the garden whispered, though there was no wind to carry the sound, "tonight the game begins." Outside, rain slicked the pavement, turning the narrow Fenway streets into ribbons of liquid glass. The white hatchback still idled, headlights low, the 2 men inside cloaked in shadows. The taller one, the driver, checked his watch. His face was sharp, angular, eyes hard with focus. The younger man beside him fidgeted, drumming his gloved fingers against the dash in an erratic rhythm. "Relax," the driver muttered without looking at him. "We've done this a dozen times. Just another night, another job." But somewhere deep in the city, something shifted, a quiet ripple that neither of them could see, but that Hermes felt, vibrating through the marble veins of his statue form like a pulse. Inside the museum, Rick Abath stared at the monitor feed. The cameras showed the 2 uniformed officers at the door, rain streaking across their caps, red and blue lights strobing faintly in the mist behind them. "Police," one of them repeated into the intercom. "We got a call about a disturbance. Open up." Rick hesitated. The static hum of the security room filled his ears. He wasn't supposed to let anyone in without clearance. That was the rule. But it was Boston, a city where rules bent under the weight of familiarity and fatigue. And it was St. Patrick's weekend. People did stupid things. He pressed the buzzer. The lock clicked, the heavy door groaned open, and the night, so still, so hushed until now, exhaled. In the courtyard, a ripple passed through the fountain. The surface water trembled, distorting the reflection of Hermes' face until it seemed to grin wide, wicked, and knowing. Ah, the garden seemed to hum, its stone and marble and quiet darkness alive with anticipation. They are here. The footsteps echoed before the men appeared, muted thuds against marble floors. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, walked with calm confidence, as though every hallway, every turn was familiar. The other followed a step behind, carrying a black duffel bag, his movements sharp and clipped, like a blade drawn in secret. Rick led them in without question, offering a tired smile, muttering something about long nights. He didn't notice the way their eyes scanned the walls, the corners, the cameras. Didn't notice the strange, electric hum that seemed to build in the stillness, as though the air itself was watching. And above, in the unseen places where myth bleeds into memory, the watcher stirred. Not Hermes, not yet. This was older, deeper, something that had been bound to the Gardner since the first brick had been laid, when Isabella Stewart Gardner herself had stood in this garden and whispered her strange prayers into the marble and stone. A guardian of sorts, a keeper. It had watched 100 years of quiet nights. It had seen lovers steal kisses in shadowed alcoves, scholars wander the halls in awe, children laugh at the strange frozen gods in the courtyard. But tonight, the air was wrong. Tonight, the garden was waiting. As the men moved deeper into the museum, their uniforms crisp, their voices low, the garden listened. And in the corner of the courtyard, where shadows pooled thick as ink, something else, something unseen by mortal eyes, opened its gaze. A figure, cloaked in starlight, lingered near the fountain, half there, half not. The water didn't ripple at his feet. The marble statues didn't see him, but Hermes did. "Do you see them?" the god whispered, his voice like the hiss of air through stone cracks. The figure inclined its head, no words, just stillness, waiting. Rick sat back at his desk, strumming the soft edge of a chord, oblivious. Down in the basement, Randy hummed along to the quiet radio, his eyelids heavy. And above, on the monitors, the two men moved through the museum like shadows, calm, silent, inevitable. The night held its breath. Rick Abath always told himself the Gardner was the easiest job in the world. $12 an hour, a quiet building, and the chance to spend a night surrounded by priceless art, even if he barely understood any of it. He didn't need to. He liked the quiet, the stillness. The hum of the security room was a kind of lullaby, the soft buzz of the monitors filling the silence as he leaned back in his chair, guitar across his lap. His fingers picked out a melody, not quite a song, not yet, but something raw and soft. "Man," Randy's voice crackled through the basement radio, "if I have to listen to another night of dead air, I'm gonna lose it." Rick smirked and pressed the intercom button. "Yeah, well, at least you're not stuck watching static on a screen. I swear, these cameras are like ghosts. Nothing ever happens." And yet, tonight, something felt off. He couldn't put words to it. Maybe it was the weather, The way the rain kept starting and stopping, tapping against the glass roof above the courtyard like impatient fingers. Maybe it was the quiet, too deep, too still, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Rick shook it off. Nights could get to you in places like this. The Gardner wasn't just a museum, it was a maze of time. Each hallway led to another century. Each gallery carried the weight of eyes, painted, sculpted, unseen, that followed you no matter where you went.
Downstairs, Randy made his rounds. He was older than Rick, quieter, his walk slow but steady as he moved through the dim-lit halls. His flashlight beam cut thin ribbons through the dark, skimming across gilded frames and marble busts. In the Dutch room, the Rembrandts glowed faintly in the muted security lighting. The storm outside rattled faintly against the window panes, casting ripples of shadow across the floor. "Still here," Randy muttered under his breath, as if the paintings might one day answer. In the courtyard, water trickled softly, steady as a clock. Hermes watched, silent, unmoving. But beneath his stone surface, awareness crackled like static. The god of thresholds knew when the balance tilted, when the fragile line between the mundane and the impossible thinned. Tonight, that line had blurred to nothing. He could feel it in the marble beneath his feet, in the way the fountain's surface trembled, in the whisper that threaded through the air like the faintest breath. They are here. At 1:24 a.m., the buzzer had rung. Rick had answered. The door had opened. Now, the two men walked the halls in silence. Their uniforms, Boston PD blues, gleamed damp under the low light. Their badges caught every sliver of glow, reflecting sharp, metallic glints as they moved. To Rick, they looked like every cop he'd ever seen. Tired faces, steady steps, quiet authority. He hadn't questioned it. Maybe he should have. In the garden court, shadows pooled thicker around the edges, gathering like water in cracks of stone. Someone shifted there, just out of sight. Not Hermes this time. Something older, something bound to the museum itself. Older than brick, older than city, older even than Isabella Stewart Gardner's whispered promises when the first walls were raised. A sentinel. A keeper of stories.
"Anything unusual tonight?" the taller man asked as they passed Rick, his voice calm, almost warm. Rick shook his head. "Nah, quiet as always." The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Downstairs, Randy's radio sputtered, catching static. He paused, tilting his head, listening. Through the crackle, a faint sound threaded its way in, something like a low, rhythmic hum, almost music. He frowned, twisting the dial. The sound vanished. For a moment, the hallway seemed darker, the air heavier. Then the lights flickered, just once, and steadied. Randy shook his head and kept walking. In the courtyard, the fountain overflowed, water spilling over its lip in thin streams as though the garden itself trembled. Hermes tilted his marble head, just slightly, toward the unseen presence cloaked in starlight near the fountain. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. The figure did not answer. Upstairs, Rick leaned forward in his chair, watching the monitors. The two officers moved steadily through the Dutch room, their movements efficient, deliberate. They didn't pause to check windows or alarms,
didn't exchange idle chatter. For a moment, Rick frowned. Something in his chest tightened. Instinct, maybe. The kind of unease you couldn't name. Then the toller officer looked up, directly into the camera, and smiled. Rick froze. The man's eyes were calm, unblinking. And somewhere above, in the unseen places where myth presses thin against reality, the garden whispered a single word, soft as falling rain. Run.
The air in the Gardner shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift only a quiet building knows. The faint hum of electricity seemed sharper, the silence heavier, as if every hallway, every marble statue, every painting sensed that something unnatural had crossed the threshold. In the garden court, the fountain rippled, though no hand had touched it. Moonlight refracted across the glass ceiling, bending into fractured beams. Hermes, stone still, eternally poised, tilted his gaze toward the far corridor where footsteps moved, slow and deliberate. The thieves had entered, and the game had begun. Rick leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the edge of the console. The static buzz of the monitors filled the room. On screen, the two officers moved with unhurried precision, their boots leaving wet prints along the polished floors. Something gnawed at him. Maybe it was the way they didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, didn't even glance around like men new to the space. They moved like they belonged, like they had been here before. His hand hovered over the radio to call Randy, but before he could press the button, the intercom crackled. "You!" The taller officer's voice said, smooth and calm. "Step away from the desk." Rick blinked. "What?" "Step away," the man repeated. The room felt smaller suddenly, the hum of the monitors louder. Rick hesitated, confusion clouding his thoughts. They were police. This was their job, right? But then the man stepped forward, close enough that Rick saw it. The smile that didn't touch his eyes, the sharpness behind it, the cold detachment of someone who wasn't here to protect. And before Rick could speak, before his hands could even tremble, the duct tape was out. Downstairs, Randy's radio fizzed again, spitting static. He tapped it with a gloved hand. "Rick, you there?" Silence. The hum returned, low, pulsing, almost like a heartbeat deep in the stone walls. Upstairs, Rick was face down on the cold floor, wrists bound tight, his voice muffled beneath the strip of tape across his mouth. His guitar leaned forgotten against the wall, a single string humming faintly, as if vibrating to some frequency no one could hear. The taller thief crouched beside him, calm, precise. "You'll be fine. Stay quiet. Don't move." Rick's heart pounded. His breath came sharp and shallow. And through the ringing in his ears, he swore he heard it. A whisper, soft and alien, threading through the static hum of the room. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The thieves moved quickly now, purposeful. Every step measured, every gesture rehearsed. The younger one slipped down the hallway, duffel bag swinging lightly at his side, while the older one moved toward the basement. The building, the marble, the stone, the wood, seemed to groan as they passed. In the garden court, Hermes watched, his stone grin widening. "Ah," he murmured, voice like the hiss of 1,000 years caught in a breath. "The dance begins."
Randy didn't hear them coming. One moment, he was adjusting his flashlight, the beam catching the edges of Vermeer's The Concert upstairs. The next, a heavy hand clamped over his shoulder, and a voice, calm, unshaken, said, "Don't fight." The duct tape hissed from the roll, a sharp sound in the silence. And then there were two guards on the floor, bound, helpless. The museum was theirs. The older thief moved with quiet efficiency, securing the guards before signaling to his partner. The duffel bag opened. Tools gleamed faintly in the low light. Blades, crowbars, gloves. The younger man moved to the Dutch room first. Every step echoed, soft but sharp, like the tick of a clock counting down. He stopped before The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the Rembrandt. His gloved hand hovered over the gilded frame for a moment. A pause. Reverence, maybe, or hesitation. And in that pause, something shifted in the air. From somewhere unseen, a whisper curled through the gallery like smoke. "You cannot take what is not freely given." The younger thief froze. His eyes darted toward the shadows, but there was nothing there. Only the quiet hum of the security lights, the faint rattle of rain against the windows. Then the older thief's voice cut in, low and sharp. "Focus. Take it."
The crowbar bit into the wood. The frame groaned. And then, with a soft snap, the painting came free, canvas trembling like a living thing. In the courtyard, the fountain rippled violently, water spilling over its edges. The air thickened, heavy, charged. Hermes tilted his marble head, a flash of mischief in his still carved eyes. "Oh, little mortals, you never understand the cost." The younger thief slid the painting into the tube. One down, then another, then another. Vermeer, Degas, Rembrandt. The museum, once silent, now hummed with something deeper, something angry. From the far end of the Dutch room, a sound, soft, sharp, like a breath drawn in. The younger thief froze again, turning slowly. But there was nothing. Only the painted faces staring back at him, frozen, eternal, as if watching him steal pieces of their world. By the time they moved to the next gallery, the night itself seemed to bend around them. The halls elongated, shadows pooling thick and cold. But they didn't notice. Not yet. They moved like men in a dream, unaware that the dream was no longer theirs.
The gardener breathed, not like a building should, not with the quiet hum of vents and old pipes in the walls, but with a steady, low rhythm, like the heartbeat of something ancient and alive. The air thickened, the kind of weight that pressed against the skin, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked stone and centuries-old paint. The thieves didn't notice. In the Dutch room, the younger one worked fast. Canvas slipped into the long, narrow tubes. Frames lay empty, their wooden edges jagged and splintered where the crowbars had pried them apart. The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. The Concert. Landscape with an obelisk. Masterpieces worth more than any number they could name. He didn't look at the art as he packed it. Didn't look at the painted faces staring back at him, frozen mid-expression, their soft oil-slick eyes carrying the weight of lives long gone. From somewhere unseen, the whisper came again. "Do you know what you take?" He froze. His partner's voice crackled softly through the radio clipped to his vest. "Time check. 2 minutes. Move." The younger thief blinked, breath sharp, and shook it off. Adrenaline made tricks of the mind. In the courtyard, the fountain surged. Water spilled over its stone edge in silver ribbons, pooling across the tiles.
Marble eyes, Hermes, the Muses, saints frozen in silent prayer, turned inward, listening. The god tilted his head, carved lips almost curling. "They take," Hermes whispered, voice threading through the night like the hiss of a match, "but they do not ask." Upstairs, the Dutch room was nearly empty now. One by one, the treasures disappeared into the bags, centuries of genius folded into narrow, unmarked containers. When they reached the frame that held the ancient finial, a small gilded eagle perched atop a flagpole base, the younger thief hesitated again. It was an odd piece, unremarkable compared to the Rembrandts and Vermeers. Yet something about it hummed, a quiet vibration under his glove, like the faint hum of a string pulled taut. "Take it," the older thief said, his tone clipped. "We're on the clock." The younger one pried it loose, and the hum deepened. In the basement, Rick and Randy lay bound, side by side, the chill of the concrete floor biting through their uniforms. Rick tried to breathe slow, tried to keep his heart from hammering, but every sound above, every creak, every muffled thud of footsteps made his chest tighten. Then, faintly, beneath the panic, he heard it. Music. Not the radio, not the quiet hum of machines, something softer, ancient, like strings plucked in a distant hall, notes older than the building itself. He blinked hard, squeezing his eyes shut. When he opened them, the music was gone.
At 2:28 a.m., the thieves moved through the last of the galleries. Every step echoed, sharp, clean, precise. The museum seemed to stretch with them, hallways bending, shadows deepening, until it no longer felt like a building in Boston, but something else, something older, stranger, a place caught between time and the whisper of a myth. The younger thief paused in the blue room, where a tiny Degas sketch hung. A dancer, mid-pose, charcoal lines frozen in motion. He reached for it, but his glove brushed air. The sketch was gone. He blinked, looked again. Empty frame. "No," he whispered, voice thin. "It was here." "Bag it," the older thief snapped from the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the dim glow of emergency lights. "But—" the whisper cut through his hesitation. "Not yours." The sound was not sound at all, more a vibration in his skull, in the bones of the museum itself. For a moment, the younger thief swore he saw something in the corner of his eye, a shadow flickering between the statues, the glint of wings, a face not quite human, watching him with impossible stillness. Then it was gone. The bag filled, the seconds drained, and then silence. Not the ordinary quiet of an empty building, but a void. The absence of sound so complete it pressed into the skin like cold. The older thief froze mid-step, glancing toward the courtyard. "Did you hear that?" His partner shook his head quickly, though his hands trembled. "No," he said. "No, I didn't hear." The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. In the garden court, the fountain fell silent. Water hung suspended, droplets frozen in midair like glass beads. The Muses leaned forward in their marble stillness,
Hermes tilted his head, grin sharp now, carved eyes gleaming in moonlight. "They think they are taking," he whispered, almost laughing, "but they are being invited." At 2:40 a.m., the thieves walked out the way they came, calm, unhurried. The bags were heavy now, filled with $500 million worth of history, but they carried them like feathers. No one stopped them. No one saw them. And as they stepped into the wet night, the rain eased to a whisper, as if the city itself bowed to let them pass. In the basement, Rick and Randy lay in stunned silence, the distant hum of their radios the only sound left in the building. And above them, in the museum's hollow, emptied rooms, the shadows gathered again. The garden court shimmered in the pale light, water moving once more in quiet ripples, as if nothing had happened at all. Hermes stood still, but his marble grin lingered. "Now," he said softly, though no mortal could hear him, "now we wait."
For a few hours after the thieves vanished into the rain, the Gardner was quiet. Too quiet. The rain softened, turning to a thin mist that curled against the stone walls of the museum like a ghost reluctant to leave. Inside, the halls lay frozen, the empty frames gaping like wounds. The Dutch room, once alive with color and light, now looked hollow, stripped, abandoned. And yet, something still lingered. A hum, low, subtle, ancient. It pulsed through the marble floors, through the wooden beams, through the chilled air of the courtyard where the fountain rippled, though no breeze stirred the water. High above the city, in places where mortal eyes could not see, the gods stirred. Clio, muse of history, was the first to wake. Draped in pale linen, her hair spilling in a dark cascade over her shoulders, she sat in the shadowed corners of eternity and stared down at Boston. She saw the empty frames, the splintered wood, the hollowed silence left in the wake of greedy hands, and her voice, quiet but sharp, like a quill scratching across parchment, broke the stillness. "They have taken the stories." Beside her, Thalia, muse of comedy, tilted her head. The laughter that usually curled at her lips was gone now, replaced by a sharp, unreadable tension. "They do not understand what they've done. Those pieces, they are not just paintings, they are anchors, memories bound to the weave of the world."
From the far side of the chamber, Apollo stepped forward, his golden light dimmed to an almost ember glow. His gaze was sharp, but sorrow bled through it like ink through cloth. "Art is never stolen," he said. "Not truly. It waits, it remembers, but those who take without offering—" His voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken warning. In the garden court, the water trembled again. Hermes stood still, his marble smile untouched, but his stone shadow stretched longer, darker, as if alive. He whispered to the empty air, "They wanted riches, but they've stolen stories, stories that were never theirs to hold." Far below, in the basement of the museum, Rick Abergath lay bound on the cold concrete. Time stretched thin, minutes bleeding into hours. His heart still thudded against his ribs, every small noise amplified by fear and confusion. And through the static hum in his ears, he heard it again. A sound that wasn't there. Strings, faint, ethereal, playing a melody too old to belong to this century. He squeezed his eyes shut, told himself it was just the adrenaline,
just his mind breaking under the weight of what had happened. But the music lingered, soft, unrelenting.
By dawn, Boston was awake. News of the theft spread like wildfire. By 8 o'clock, the museum was crawling with officers, reporters, and agents in dark suits, their voices sharp and clipped as they combed through the shattered remnants of the night. "500 million," one agent muttered, staring at the empty frames in the Dutch room. Gone. Just gone. Another shook his head, eyes tracing the jagged edges of splintered wood. "Fastest job I've ever seen. They knew exactly what to take." What none of them noticed, what none of them could notice, was the way the air in the Dutch room bent and shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt in the summer, like the faint mirage of something watching. At 10 a.m., a detective named Eleanor Rhodes stood in the courtyard, her gaze fixed on the fountain. She was young, sharp, her coat buttoned high against the cold. But there was something in her eyes, the kind of clarity that came from seeing patterns others missed. She didn't look at the empty walls, didn't care for the chaos of men taking photos, setting up evidence markers, muttering theories. Instead, she listened to the hum, to the faint, steady ripple of water that somehow sounded louder than it should have been. And when her gaze drifted upward to the marble figure of Hermes, she swore, just for a heartbeat, that his carved eyes were turned toward her, watching. That night, when the museum was finally sealed, when the police tapes stretched tight and the floodlights dimmed, the Gardner stood alone again. The fountain in the courtyard stilled. The air grew heavy, electric, thick with something no mortal could name. And in the quiet, a voice rose. Not one voice, many. Whispers of the muses, threading through the marble and stone, through the empty rooms and shattered silence. "Return what was taken. Balance must be restored, or the city will remember." Boston, unaware, slept beneath the hum of streetlights and the low murmur of the Charles. But in the narrow alleys, in the shadowed corners of forgotten streets, stray dogs lifted their heads and howled. And in the places where myths breathe, the city began to stir. Boston woke to headlines that screamed. By dawn, the Boston Globe ran the story in bold black type. Gardner Museum robbed, $500 million in art gone. Other papers followed suit. The numbers changed, the details blurred, but the shock stayed sharp. $500 million in masterpieces vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but splintered wood and silence. The city hummed with theories. Talk show hosts spun conspiracies. Locals swore it was an inside job. But in the streets, beneath the noise, the story was quieter, stranger. Detective Eleanor Rhodes sat in the cramped conference room of the FBI field office, the file open in front of her. Photographs spread across the table, empty frames, broken locks, the dull, stunned faces of the guards still too shaken to speak. She leaned back in her chair, eyes on the ceiling. Something about it all felt wrong. Not just the precision, though that was unsettling enough. Not just the way the movers moved, almost rehearsed, like they'd studied every step. No, it was the silence. Witnesses on the street heard nothing. No shouts, no alarms, no scuffle. Just the faint echo of sirens, and then nothing. Like the city had fallen asleep just for a moment. By mid-morning, the calls began. A man in Cambridge swore he'd seen one of the stolen paintings, the Vermeer, the concert, reflected in a shop window, but when agents checked, the glass was empty, the street deserted. An elderly woman in Beacon Hill reported a man in an antique tricorn hat standing outside her townhouse at 3 a.m, humming a tune she couldn't quite place. She said the tune followed her into her dreams. A taxi driver swore a man paid him in coins so old they crumbled like paper when he tried to count them. Each report stranger than the last. That evening, Eleanor walked the city alone, tracing the edges of the Gardner's neighborhood. She paused near the Fenway, where mist hung low over the streets, and the street lamps cast long, watery halos on the slick pavement. The world was quiet. Too quiet. The hum she'd heard that first morning at the museum was louder now, like a thread pulling her forward. She stopped in front of the Gardner. Police tape fluttered in the soft wind. The building loomed in silence, its windows dark, its garden still. "Who are you talking to?" The voice startled her. She turned sharply, finding a man standing under the nearest streetlight. His coat was heavy and old-fashioned, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. He wasn't there a moment ago. For a moment neither spoke. Then he smiled, slow, almost kind. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was soft, threaded with an accent she couldn't place. Old, but not ancient. Timeless. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked. His smile deepened, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who remembers, and someone who knows when the balance has been broken."
The next day, the leads went cold. The FBI tightened its net. Suspects were questioned, alibis checked, theories drawn and discarded. But Eleanor couldn't shake the man's words. The balance has been broken. She returned to the Dutch room that night when the museum was empty. She stood among the empty frames, the hum now steady in her bones, and then she heard it. Not a voice exactly, more like a breath. Return what was taken. Outside, the Charles River ran black under the bridge lights, and in the reflection of the water, just for an instant, Eleanor thought she saw them, tall, radiant figures, their forms shifting like smoke. The Muses, watching, waiting. Far from Boston, in a private collection in New York, a man unwrapped a crate shipped under false papers. Inside, wrapped in linen, a small sketch by Degas stared back at him. As he laid it on the table, the lights flickered, the temperature dropped, and from somewhere unseen, soft strings began to play, faint, sorrowful, unending.
Boston had never felt so small. By day it bustled, commuters pressing through South Station, students spilling from the T, the hum of everyday life carrying on as though nothing had changed. But at night, when the streets emptied and fog curled through the narrow alleys, the city turned strange. Shadows stretched too far. Footsteps echoed when no one walked nearby. And Eleanor Rhodes couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. It started with glimpses. The flash of a dark coat at the edge of her vision near Copley Square. A silhouette under the Harvard Bridge staring down at the black ripples of the Charles. And once, just once, his reflection in the mirrored glass of the Prudential Building, though when she turned, the street below was empty. Every sighting came with the same thing, a melody, soft and distant, like a violin played behind closed doors. Always the same tune. 3 nights after their first meeting, Eleanor returned to the Gardner Museum. She flashed her credentials to the night officer, muttered something about reviewing evidence, and slipped inside. The museum was silent, save for the faint hum she'd grown used to. She walked through the courtyard, the fountain whispering in the stillness, and into the Dutch room. And there he was, standing where Vermeer's The Concert had once hung. Hat tilted low, hands folded neatly behind his back. "You again," Eleanor said, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. He turned, slow and deliberate, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim. "You shouldn't be here," he said. The same words as before. "You've said that," Eleanor replied, stepping closer. "Why don't you tell me why?"
He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're not like the others," he said. "They see numbers, money, headlines. You hear the hum, don't you? The echo of what's been broken." Eleanor hesitated. "Who are you?" A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "Names change," he said. "Centuries pass, but some stories remain. Call me Hermes, if it helps." Eleanor stared. "The Greek god?" "Messenger. Thief. Trickster." He spread his hands slightly. "I've been called many things, but I prefer guide. It's simpler." "This is insane," Eleanor muttered, turning away, but the hum in her bones surged, electric, undeniable. "You felt it," Hermes said, his voice soft but sharp. "The city is stirring. The balance is off. Those paintings, they were more than art, anchors, stories that kept certain doors closed." "Doors to what?" she asked. "To everything you don't believe in," Hermes said simply. "And now those doors are opening."
The lights flickered. Eleanor's breath caught. From the empty frame behind Hermes, a sound rose, faint at first, like distant rain, then sharper, music, strings, the very same melody that haunted her nights. "The Muses," Hermes whispered, almost reverently. "They're restless. They want their stories back." Later, alone in her apartment, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, staring at the case files spread out like a map of obsession. The evidence, the security footage, the timelines, the witness statements, told one story. But the hum in her veins told another. Every theory she'd built over years of detective work crumbled against what she'd seen. And what terrified her most wasn't that Hermes was real. It was that, deep down, some part of her had always known. In the darkness of her apartment, the radio flickered on without warning. Static. Then that same old melody. And beneath it, a whisper, soft and sharp as glass. "Find them, Eleanor, before the city remembers." The next morning, Boston woke damp and gray. Eleanor Rhodes sat at her desk in the FBI field office, the city outside blurred by rain-streaked windows. Coffee sat untouched in front of her, cooling by the second. The file spread before her had stopped feeling like an investigation. It was a puzzle, and she'd started to suspect the pieces belonged to a much older game. She pushed aside the official reports, the witness statements, the grainy surveillance stills, the endless lists of suspects, and focused instead on what shouldn't make sense. A Vermeer, a Rembrandt, a Manet, 5 Degas sketches, an ancient Chinese beaker. paintings stolen not for cash, but for meaning. She closed her eyes, hearing Hermes' voice from the night before. Anchors, stories that kept certain doors closed. The first thread appeared in an obscure report written decades earlier by an art historian from Harvard. He'd claimed that certain works in the Gardner's collection, particularly the Vermeer and the Rembrandt, were rumored to have been touched by something older, their pigments tied to rituals dating back to Renaissance mystics. A note scribbled in the margin, in handwriting no archivist recognized, read, "Guard them well. When the anchors are gone, the city will hum." By noon, Eleanor was at the Boston Public Library, rain dripping from her coat as she descended into the archives. The librarian, an elderly man with sharp eyes, didn't blink when she asked for restricted texts on mythological symbolism in European art. He simply led her down narrow stairs, unlocking a room that smelled of dust and leather. For hours, Eleanor read, and slowly a pattern emerged.
The Gardner paintings, each one, had threads leading back to stories older than the city itself. The Rembrandt, Christ in the storm on the Sea of Galilee, tied to the legend of a sailor who claimed the painting whispered warnings during violent storms. The Vermeer, the concert, connected to an 18th century account of a Venetian collector who swore the music in the painting could be heard during lunar eclipses. Even the Degas sketches, seemingly mundane, carried strange histories. Dancers seen in dreams, movements mirrored by those who had never learned to dance. It wasn't theft. It was ritual. By dusk, Eleanor found herself back at the Gardner, staring at the empty frames again. The air was colder now, sharp enough to raise goosebumps along her arms. "You're learning," said a voice behind her. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. "Hermes," she said, her voice steady. "Names are just words," he replied, stepping into view. His hat cast a long shadow across the Dutch room, where moonlight pooled on the polished floor. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you're listening," he said simply. "Most people never do."
Eleanor studied him carefully. "These paintings, you said they were anchors. What happens now that they're gone?" Hermes tilted his head, almost amused. "The city remembers," he said. "The stories buried in its bones, the ones built over by concrete and steel, start to wake. And when they wake, they want to be told again." A sharp wind rattled the glass, though the night outside was still. Somewhere in the distance, a low, mournful note rang out, like the sound of a cello played under water. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me the story." Hermes stepped closer, his voice dropping low, almost reverent. "Boston," he said, "was built on borrowed ground. Before the Puritans, before the traders, before the stones of the harbor, there were others here, ones who spoke to the rivers and read the tides. They knew that art, real art, could bind things, protect them, or release them." His gaze met hers, sharp as broken glass. The heist wasn't about greed. It was about opening a door that was never meant to open. The hum in the air deepened, vibrating through the walls, through Eleanor's bones, and for the first time, she understood. This wasn't just about stolen art. It was about the city itself, and something, or someone, was trying to come home.
The storm rolled in just after midnight. From the harbor to the back bay, the city seemed to hold its breath as rain lashed the streets and the tide climbed higher than the weather service predicted. The sky split with lightning, not white, but a strange, shimmering gold, painting the water in an otherworldly glow. Eleanor Rhodes stood at the edge of Long Wharf, the hood of her jacket soaked through, the cold biting her skin. She wasn't sure why she was there, only that the hum in her veins had pulled her toward the harbor like a tide she couldn't resist. The harbor wasn't quiet. Beneath the howl of the wind and the slap of waves against the pier, there were whispers. Not the random rush of sound carried by storms, but voices, layered, echoing, ancient. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it. Then she saw him. Hermes stood at the end of the pier, coat whipping in the wind, hat shadowing his face. "You feel it," he said, without turning, his voice perfectly clear despite the storm. Eleanor swallowed hard. "What is it?" "The city," he said, simply. "It's remembering." The water below churned, black and restless, and then, as lightning cracked across the sky, something broke the surface. At first, Eleanor thought it was driftwood, some splintered piece of a forgotten boat. But then it moved, slow, deliberate, and she saw the curve of a carved figurehead, barnacles clinging to its surface like rotted jewels. A ship, or what was left of one. The outline of its hull rose through the water like a ghost, sails shredded, masts cracked but upright. And from the deck, the faintest glimmer of gold. "Is that—" Eleanor's words caught in her throat. "The Concordia," Hermes said. "She sank in 1712, rumored to be carrying relics taken from the old world, anchors of their own. Now she returns." The ship tilted, the water around it glowing faintly, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. Eleanor stepped closer to the edge of the pier. Why now? Hermes finally turned, his gaze sharp. "Because the paintings are gone. The locks have been undone, and now what was buried is free." The storm surged again, harder this time, as if the city itself was exhaling after centuries of silence. Somewhere behind her, alarms blared faintly, car horns, security systems, but the sound felt distant, swallowed by the roar of the tide. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the vision of the ship dissolved, sinking beneath the water with a hiss, leaving only the violent churn of the harbor. Eleanor staggered back, breath ragged. What the hell was that? Hermes adjusted his hat, his expression unreadable. "An echo," he said. "One of many. Boston will show you its memories now. Not all of them will be kind." Back in her apartment, soaked to the bone, Eleanor stared at her reflection in the mirror. The hum was louder now, constant, like the steady vibration of a low note played on a cello. She turned on the news. A fishing boat reported vanishing lights off the harbor. Residents of Beacon Hill claimed they heard singing at dawn, a chorus that faded with the first light of day. And in the public garden, the statue of George Washington had turned, ever so slightly, to face the Charles River. Eleanor shut the TV off. The city wasn't just remembering, it was waking. The city was not quiet anymore. Boston pulsed like a living thing, the streets humming beneath Eleanor's feet as if some vast engine had been turned on after centuries of slumber. Lights flickered in every window along the harbor. The tide clawed against the seawalls with a hungry rhythm. And the paintings, all 13, gone for 30 years, flickered like ghostly projections across the museum's darkened walls. She stood in the empty gallery, rain dripping from her coat, Hermes at her side. "You said it would wake," she whispered. He nodded, his hat tilted low, his face unreadable. "I told you the anchors were gone. What comes next is up to you." Eleanor stared at the frame before her, empty, gilded, cracked at the edges. The last frame in the museum, untouched during the heist, glowing faintly with a soft golden light. "What do I do?" "You listen," Hermes said. "For once, you stop running from the story and you let it tell itself." The hum in her veins crescendoed. The rain outside vanished into silence. The room brightened with an impossible dawn. And then she heard them. Whispers, layered, eternal, the voices of the city itself. The stolen paintings flashed in her mind, Vermeer's quiet light, Rembrandt's storm, Manet's shadowed figure. They weren't art anymore. They were maps, locks, memories all bound together to hold something far older than Boston itself.
"You're the anchor now," Hermes said, stepping back. "The choice is yours, to seal it away again or let it burn." Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought of the city, the harbor, the narrow streets, the hum of the subway beneath her feet, the quiet mornings when Boston felt small and ancient all at once. She thought of the myths she'd chased for years, the nights when she felt like every story she loved was breathing down her neck. And she thought of the ship, the ghost rising from the harbor, carrying its forgotten cargo of relics and hunger. When she opened her eyes, the gallery was aflame. Not with heat, but with golden light. Soft, endless, illuminating every frame, every shadow, every inch of silence that had clung to the museum for 30 years. She stepped forward, pressed her palm against the empty frame. The hum roared through her, sharp and infinite. And then the city exhaled. The storm broke, dissolving into a soft mist that rolled through the streets. The tide receded. The hum faded to a whisper, like the quiet ticking of a clock after it winds down. When Eleanor opened her eyes again, she was alone. The gallery was still empty. No light, no whispers. The frames were bare. And yet, something had shifted. Boston felt still, settled, as if a restless dream had finally ended.
Outside, the morning sun crept over the skyline. Commuters filled the streets, oblivious to the night that had passed. In the distance, the harbor glimmered like polished glass. Eleanor walked toward it, her steps slow, steady.
Somewhere deep in her chest, the hum lingered, softer now, not a burden, but a reminder. The myths had not disappeared. They never would. They had only changed hands. As she reached the water's edge, a single scrap of paper floated toward her on the tide. She caught it, her fingers trembling slightly. It was an old museum card, yellowed with age, a simple line etched across its surface in ink that shimmered faintly like gold. Keep the stories safe. They keep you. Eleanor smiled, tucking the card into her coat pocket. Behind her, the city stirred. And far above, in the quiet corners of a dawn-washed sky, Hermes watched, the faintest trace of a grin crossing his ageless face before fading into the mist. Boston was quiet again, but not asleep. Not ever again.